Welcome, everybody, to the first PTE Omicron chapter hosting of the AOTF Intervention Research Grant Recipient webinar series. We're so happy that you're joining us, and here we are at Boston University. I'm going to turn over the moderating to Rachel now, who will introduce our speaker, Kathy. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Rachel Heidling, and I am a PTE member here at Boston University. And we are so pleased to have Kathy Lyons here with us. And she has a presentation that she has compiled about her grant. So Kathy, if you could say hello.
Hi, thanks for letting me join you virtually here.
Hi, thank you. So throughout your presentation, as you present, everyone who is logged in can type questions as they come up, and there's just a little question box, and if you type in your questions, then after the presentation, I will go ahead and be asking you what our audience has kind of come up with. So as we go through, everyone who is logged in right now, please be sure to just type in your questions as you come up with them. And I'll hand it over back to Kathy. Great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's so nice to be with you tonight. So I'm calling in from New Hampshire, which I can finally say is sunny New Hampshire. I'm up at the Norris Cotton Cancer Center, which is located at Dartmouth College. And I'm here to tell you about a recent study we just got funded, thanks to AOTF. So I don't have results to present. I just have an idea that I'm really excited about, that our team is passionate about conducting. But I'm going to tell you what we have planned, and I'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts and your comments because we're always looking to make things stronger and make it better. So the title of the study is we're supporting caregivers who are undergoing stem cell transplantation, and it's a feasibility study of something we call the Ready to Care program. And I'll explain that acronym first. Ready to Care, the acronym CARE, we selected to mean connect, actively relax, and exercise. It's an intervention for caregivers to help them feel supported and effective in their caregiver role. So the connect means we're trying to connect people to information they need, resources they need, and social support. But then we really want to focus on their own well-being, helping them to make sure they have some good ways to manage stress in their lives and good ways to get exercise for themselves. And the little graphic you see on the picture, we sort of heard that if you ever took a flight anywhere where the airline stewardess, the flight attendants always tell you if you're traveling with someone who needs help, make sure that you put your own mask on first, so that you're able to help the other person. And so this is in the spirit of that idea of trying to facilitate well-being of the caregiver so that they can help support the patient along the journey. But let me give you some background information about stem cell transplantation. Stem cell transplant is a treatment that's pretty long and arduous, and it's a treatment for some blood cancers or other disorders of the blood. And essentially, in a nutshell, it's giving people a high-intensity chemotherapy and radiation, which you then rebuild their bone marrow. You give them some stem cells to essentially create a new immune system that has been wiped out by this toxic treatment. It's a long period. Patients have many symptoms, but in general, all of them have extreme fatigue because of they have a lot of anemia, a lot of things going on with their blood. And where you're rebuilding the immune system, there is this prolonged risk for infection. So particularly for certain types of stem cell transplant, patients actually need to have a caregiver that they've identified that will be available to help them throughout this prolonged recovery period. And caregivers essentially have a lot of different roles. One of them is they have very specific things they need to do to clean the environment and bleach certain things and really try to reduce the risk of infection. Caregivers are really important in helping patients to manage their symptoms and side effects because, again, when the patients are so depleted and have so little physical reserve left, they're very fatigued. It's not like they can go up and make their own food and take care of themselves and get good nutrition. They really need again, while the person's in a more fragile state as they're recovering at home, they're really the eyes and ears of the medical team. They have to know when to call someone and when to give more support or ask for help. And the literature has demonstrated that many caregivers, almost 2/3, if not more than half, report a significant level of depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms, and certainly report a lot of stress in the period leading up to the transplant and during the transplant. Many caregivers report a lot of symptoms of their own, including fatigue or some form of cognitive dysfunction. A lot of people have sleep disturbances. And the literature even supports that some caregivers report more symptom burden than patients. It's a really difficult job that they have taken on. And so I did some work a couple of years ago with the clinicians on the stem cell transplantation team, where we were looking at activity recovery, functional recovery of patients after this transplant process. And a couple of months before we put in this grant, one of the nurses and I ran into each other on the floor, and she said, "Oh, I really wish we could do another study, and we've been talking about a couple of ideas, and we're really thinking about the caregivers on our team for our patients, and we're worried about them, and to be honest, the patients are worried about them too. The patients are often telling us, I'm doing okay, everyone's taking care of me, but it's my wife that needs help, it's my son who, needs help, he's trying to take care of me." Mm-hmm. And so the clinicians were wondering, how can we do, they're trying to do a good job, they think they're doing a pretty good job, but they feel like, what else can we do for our caregivers, many of whom are under enormous amounts of strain. So how can we take care of our caregivers as well as our patients? Which was very intriguing to me as an occupational therapist, because I think about caregiving not just from the tasks that you have to do, but as an occupation that we would need to learn, that would involve new habits and routines. Given the effects of the stem cell transplant on the immune system, it's certainly interesting in terms of how do you modify the environment, take care of the environment to minimize risk, how do you adapt activities when people are fatigued and fragile so that they can still participate in some things that might be important to them. In my background, I've been doing other work in the Cancer Center where we were working with the patients themselves, either during cancer treatment or after cancer treatment, where we were doing different interventions to try to help promote active coping and goal attainment so that they could get back to their meaningful occupations. And so I thought that the work that we've been doing, developing interventions for patients, actually would work well for many of the caregivers. So I was very excited when we started talking and we got a team together of nurse, social workers, physicians to try to figure out what we wanted to do in this area. And this next slide just talks about the intervention development pipeline in terms of if we're trying to figure out what could we do that would help someone. Sometimes we're at that third bullet where it's that third arrow where it talks about implementing an intervention. So if someone's developed something, we don't need to recreate the wheel, but maybe we need to learn how could we do it at our own hospital. But sometimes we're way back to the left at that development stage where there's nothing that really targets what we want to do, and we have to do a little discovery, seeing what's done in the literature and talk to participants and try to figure out what they need and do a little bit of feasibility testing. And so when we first started on this journey, we didn't know if it was just finding a caregiver intervention out there that we liked, that we wanted to try to implement, or whether we needed to develop something from the ground up. So we went back to the literature, and we looked at what's out there. And in terms of evidence-based interventions for caregivers, they fall into about 3 different buckets. There are a lot of interventions that focus on education, training people to be a caregiver. And some of them have a focus on self-management skills, and some of them just sort of focus on caregiving roles. But they generally are set up so that there are fixed topics. It's a 10-week course, and you go through all 10 chapters in this order, because first you need to learn about symptom management, and then you need to learn about stress, or, sort of a fixed didactic type of intervention. There also are other interventions that are support group in nature, supportive interventions where they could be either peer-led or facilitated by someone like a social worker or a therapist, trying to get people talking talking and learning from each other and getting that emotional support they need to help deal with stress. And other interventions focus on mindfulness or stress reduction, which focuses on one aspect of caregiving, but not necessarily the whole thing. And when we looked at the literature, we found that the interventions that are out there generally have small to moderate effect sizes. But it's pretty hard to get significant numbers of people recruited into programs or studies because caregivers are often really busy and too tired to participate. And so that's what sort of was out there in the literature about what do we do and, what are the problems with what we do. So when we talked as a team, and particularly I feel like from my vantage point, at my heart, I'm an occupational therapist, and I thought that maybe there would be two things we could bring to the table that might help boost the effectiveness of the caregiver interventions that are out there. First of all, because people are busy and they want to, everyone sort of has their own profile of stressors and burdens, we wondered instead of having this fixed 10-week curriculum where all caregivers do the same thing, we wondered if we could have a person-directed intervention where each caregiver could tell us, these are my problems that I want to work on, as opposed to having to wait to get to week 6 when we finally talk about whatever it is, financial toxicity or whatever it is that I feel like is my problem as a caregiver. And the second strategy we thought that might help boost effectiveness of the existing caregiver interventions is to make it occupation-based or experiential. Instead of just giving information and talking to people, that we could actually follow up with some practice. That hands-on OT-ish stuff that we do in terms of you want to work on getting some work on your own stress management, let's do some guided imagery or relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation now. Or, you want to try to get a little bit of exercise because it's going to help you sleep better, let's take a walk right now. And followed up by some action planning so that between sessions they would be practicing some things that we do together, which is a core element of the different interventions I've been doing in my other work in cancer rehabilitation. So we thought that might be a nice strategy to try. We also found in the literature an article by Gemma and colleagues where they talked about stressors and buffers. They did sort of a systematic review where they talked about from the empirical data, what do we know? Caregivers have a harder time with well-being, quality of life, functioning as a caregiver when they have these things on the left side. The red issues are sort of when they have their own physical problems. The green bullets are when they have their own emotional issues, anxiety, or feeling like I'm not prepared to do this. The black issues are sort of issues related to social well-being, or the orange at the bottom is if they're experiencing existential angst. So things on the left side are stressors that make it harder to be a caregiver. Things on the right side are empirical, again from the empirical literature that suggests things that it makes it easier to be a caregiver. They buffer that stress when you manage your own health, when you are able to get a little bit of exercise and practice good sleep hygiene, when you can adopt an optimistic attitude or you have a little bit of self-efficacy regarding your caregiving, when you have the social support you need, when you have your own stress management practice. So what we thought from that in the literature, we thought it would be really nice if we had an intervention that tried to not only damp down the stressors, but increase these buffers. How can we get people to have more things in the right-hand column than the left-hand column? So that's how we came up with this Ready to Care program. We thought our plan is that we're going to do 6 sessions that really start when the patient's here in the hospital for their stem cell reinfusion. We're going to start working with the caregivers who are learning a lot about their caregiving, how to be a caregiver when the patient goes home. And we thought that we would have the topics be caregiver-driven, whatever they felt they wanted to work on. So similar to what you do in clinical practice, where you do an occupational profile or some assessment, then you go to what their needs are. We thought we would do the same thing where we talk to people about how are they doing in these 4 domains of physical well-being, psychological well-being, social well-being, and spiritual well-being, with the idea that we want to try to minimize whatever stresses we can minimize, maximize the buffers, setting and action planning framework that I used in other intervention studies we've done with weekly practice in between. So that's our idea. This flow chart sort of walks you through the model that we think that, by doing this box at the top, by doing the Ready to Care program, we think that it will help increase caregiver self-efficacy, help them to be more adaptive coping, which when you do those two things, it leads to better, lower symptom burden because they've been able to manage those symptoms better, which can increase the patient quality of life. And then hopefully it's going to spill down to reducing some of those healthcare utilization issues, fewer urgent care visits because they've been able to use their resources and stay on top and call the clinicians and check in before the wheels come off the bus, so to speak. So that's sort of the model of what we hoped the outcomes would be. And so if you look at this intervention pipeline again, we're over here on the development phase, where we're really trying to develop the intervention and see if we're onto something. We have a little bit of discovery left to do, because as we put in this grant for we've got this great idea, we want to try this program, we realized we wanted to start talking to caregivers as soon as we possibly could. Even before we had a hint that we might get any money to do this, we had some pre-pilot work to do, which you would kind of call under the discovery phase of the intervention development process, where we're talking right now, I think we've got about a dozen different caregivers enrolled, talking to them about, here's this program we have in mind. What do you think of it? Which elements would you use? Which ones wouldn't you use? And then we're pilot testing the measures that we want to use that I mentioned, the self-efficacy, the adaptive coping, so that we can get a sense of what do things look like before we even intervene, sort of giving us a historical control. Because as we move forward, the grant starts this July. And so what we proposed we would do is what we would call a mixed methods feasibility study. Feasibility meeting, it's all about trying to figure out, can we get people to enroll? Will they complete the study procedures? What type of content do they want to work on? Especially where it's patient-driven, do they target all four aspects of well-being, or do some people just target two different things the way we think maybe they will? We're looking at the feasibility of the location because, as I said, we're going to start when people are in the hospital, and because we feel like that they're almost a captive audience there. The caregivers are very often, unless they're working full-time, they're very often coming in and supporting and learning what they need to do. So we thought we'd start it when the patient was in the hospital. But we might need to follow up on telephone for those caregivers who are working, or if it spills longer than the hospitalization. So that's all the feasibility aspect of, can we do this? Then we'll look at acceptability. So do people stay in the program? Do they stay in the intervention? Are they getting something out of it? And do they stay in the study assessments? Because people can withdraw from the whole study, they can withdraw from the intervention. We need to know what our retention rates will be like, and are they satisfied with what we're doing? And then, as I said, we're just looking for a hint of, does it seem to help with anything we think it would? And the outcome measures are self-efficacy, adaptive coping on the caregiver part, and then for patients, quality of life and healthcare utilization. And you can see in the top bullet, it's 20 participants. It's just small, get our feet wet, see how they're doing. It's mixed methods because we have those quantitative measures of counting numbers and measuring self-efficacy, but the qualitative part is looking at satisfaction. And to people who are more satisfied, does that tell us anything different about their quantitative numbers, or what can we learn from how they feel using both qualitative data and quantitative? And so the idea is we'll do this pilot study for a year, and from there we would come out with a treatment manual that we feel like this is solid, this is what people need, we think it works, we can train other people to do it, and the next step would be a pilot randomized control trial that we've been talking to our colleagues down in Alabama and down at Mass General who are interested in similar topics, that we would go in together on a multi-site project to get a sense of, can we do it in other places. And the thing I put here, those cryptic numbers at the bottom are program announcements to indicate that the National Institutes of Health are actually very interested in funding caregiver interventions. There's two different, this is only one mechanism that's out there, but interested in supporting caregivers because it's important to support caregivers, but also society, the cost to society when caregivers are bearing a lot of burden and falling out of the workforce and being stressed and developing their own health problems is quite significant. So that's where we're headed. I think I did it pretty well, giving us 10 minutes to talk, and I'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts, suggestions, things you think won't work, and questions. And so I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Kathy. You perfectly gave us a good 5 minutes for questions here. We really appreciate that. That was very nice. And our first question is from Nicole, and she was asking, what are your next steps if funding was not an issue? Which I know you were kind of touching on in your last slide there, creating that the treatment manual, but I don't know if you want to expand upon that at all.
That's actually a funny way to put it. If funding wasn't an issue.
If you could wave a magic wand.
These days, so I actually live on soft money, grant money. That's the only thing that pays my salary. So it's almost hard for me to imagine that money wouldn't be an issue. But certainly, I actually even say this sometimes. If I won the lottery, I would still do this work. I love research. I love what I'm doing. It would be such a delight to do it in a way that you didn't have to worry about who pays for it. But so what we would do next, regardless of whether we had regardless of the funding source, the idea is this is about feasibility, to show that we have an idea that people are interested in, that we can retain them in a study. The next step would be, okay, now it's going to be more than an idea. We have a standardized way to do this. We have a treatment manual that we can train someone else so that we know it's not just like I'm going to have a therapist who works up at Dartmouth do it with me. Her name is Jamie. So we'll know, okay, we don't want just the Jamie effect. We want to make sure we could train Karen to do it and Amanda to do it, that we can, and John, and we can do, so it would be then standardizing and training someone else. And then we would need to pilot an RCT to show that, yes, we can get people to enroll and they'll accept randomization, and yes, these are the right measures. Because, we want to know if it works before we said, like, oh, this is great, and we'll do it with everyone. Like, we need to know it's one thing if they're satisfied and they find it acceptable, but we really do need to know, does it actually make a difference? Is it more than just making them feel better? Does making them feel better actually spill over to any type of healthcare utilization or patient symptom burden? So what I would do if funding wasn't an issue is the same thing as I would do if I am blessed to get the funding.
Aww.
Just continue to pilot and then develop a full-scale rigorous RCT.
Amazing. And our next question is from Scott Campbell. Thank you for asking this question here. We have, do you think this CARE program would be useful for caregivers for other illnesses, especially chronic illnesses like Alzheimer's disease?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I definitely think because at its heart, conceptually, it's about fostering caregiver well-being in these different physical domains. Yes, the first part of it, connecting them to resources and information, like certainly that part would, it's different to care for someone with Alzheimer's than it is for someone with a stem cell transplant. There are certain things you need to know to look for. The risk profiles are different in those different patients. So certainly that little element, if there is sort of an educational piece of it, would change. But to be honest, the intervention we're doing is more of connecting them with that information, knowing that they have these nurses to turn to, because the nurses in our facility and the social workers, they do a really nice job of training caregivers anyway. We're not recreating that wheel. What we're really trying to do is get caregivers to be like, you know what, especially for something like stem cell transplant, you don't want to just gut through the next 8 months and wear yourself out so that you're the next person who's sick and he's taking care of you because you've now got yourself into a chronic fatigue syndrome or whatever. You really want to try to not deplete your own stockpiles of well-being so that you have a moment, you have some respite care so that you can go take a walk I think that those concepts translate well to any caregiving event. So certainly some of the little details are disease specific, but all of the interventions that my team has been developing are really focused on sort of generically how do we tap into getting people functioning and doing healthy behaviors. So thanks, that's a great question.
Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, but Susan Lynn is asking, when you're developing and testing interventions, how do you know it's ready for practice?
Hi, Susan. Thanks. That's a good question. Yeah, I think that I would say that the markers of that is the first thing I need to do is I have this idea, I turn it into a treatment manual so that it's driven by session one, these things happen. And for the students, like that doesn't mean that it's not individualized. I think that's sort of, you can have a treatment manual for psychotherapy, the most sort of, so it's more of just saying like these are the components of session one. You set an agenda, you did this and that. So the first thing is I set a treatment manual. The second thing, often, I mean, I've been doing a lot of pilot studies, so I often implement it myself. The next step is, okay, can I train? Can I train other people? I use this treatment manual and I train them to do it. Once I know I can train other people to do it, then I need to understand, is it efficacious? Does it work? Does it make any difference on any of the outcome measures of interest? When that happens, then I feel like, okay, now I'm on to something that I can go out there and be like, I have an evidence-based treatment that works and I want people to do it. Now, if I were only thinking about practice and implementation at that point, that's where a lot of our interventions stall, because we have these wonderful ivory tower ideas of this treatment manual that's 200 pages long, and that's not going to happen in practice. So, I mean, it's not ready for prime time until I feel like, oh yes, this is efficacious, but if I haven't thought about how it's going to actually happen in practice, no therapist is going to want to pick this up and use it. So that's the delicate balance that you have to be thinking of that, from day zero. But that's sort of my process of, how do I develop it? How do I standardize it? Train someone else to do it, and then demonstrate that it works when someone else does it.
Great. I think that perfectly wraps us up here. Thank you so much, Kathy, and we're excited to be sending this on to AOTF. And we will get ready. We have Evan on the line here for our next presentation. So thank you once again on behalf of the entire BU PTE. We really enjoyed having you with us today.
Thank you. Go BU Terriers.
Yay! Thank you. Ethan, we want to make sure you're on. Evan, we want to make sure you're on. Can you hear us? Evan, can you speak now, please? Evan, if you could start speaking now, that would be great.
Let's go to attendees.
You have to unclick you've muted your mic. Okay, you're all set.
Okay.
Evan,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. It's great. And
okay, good.
Rachel's going to introduce you, and welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, we have Evan Dean with us here. We are presenting this webinar series brought to you by Boston University PTE Omicron chapter, and we are so glad to have you here with us today. And just like our last presentation, as people come up with questions, please just write them in the question box on the right side of your screen, and then when Evan is all done presenting, we'll go through and try to answer as many as we can. So Evan, you do have the floor for the next 20 minutes. hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. Okay, there we go. I was having trouble advancing the slides, but I've got it now. Well, hi, my name is Evan Dean. I'm out at the University of Kansas. And the project that I'm going to be talking about today is about supporting employment through self-determination for young adults with autism spectrum disorder. But first, I really want to say thanks to BU and the PTE chapter. I think this is such a great event to host, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So thanks for putting this on. So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about how I got here and what got me interested in this research. So I became interested in issues regarding employment for people with autism when I was working as an OT in a community setting for adults with intellectual disability. And many of those people also had autism. So I worked in community agencies supporting community participation for over 8 years. And the agency that I'm currently working with asked me to specifically focus on employment. And I knew enough about employment to know that I needed to begin with understanding people's interests and strengths. Because like all of us, we're all more engaged when we're doing things that we're interested in. But one of the things I noticed was that the people that I was serving had a very difficult time expressing their interests and talking about them. And it wasn't because they couldn't express the interests, but they had never really been given the opportunity to explore their interests, to really find out what work looks like and feels like, to have bad jobs and learn that they don't like a certain style of boss or particular environment that we've all been lucky enough to experience. Not lucky enough to experience a bad boss, but lucky enough to be able to have the experiences we need to get us where we want to go. So these experiences led me to learn more about promoting self-determination as a starting point. Which I believe is fundamental to finding and maintaining meaningful employment. So for this project, we want to promote employment, but to do that, we really needed to begin with developing skills related to self-determination and create environments where self-determination was valued. So first of all, you know, these grants are mentorship grants. So I wanted to take a second to thank my mentors for this award. Doctors Carrie Sjogren and Michael Waymeyer at the Beach Center on Disability are my primary research mentors, and Winnie Dunn is my OT mentor. So during this presentation, I'm going to be talking a lot about the supports that we all need to reach our self-determined goals. And these three people and a lot of others have been instrumental to evolve my thinking around these ideas of self-determination and how OT can contribute. So we're focusing on self-determination within the context of employment. But why do we even care about focusing on employment? And the big reason is that employment outcomes, especially for people with autism, are pretty poor. So 58% of young adults coming out of high school have worked for pay. So that's 58% up to the age of 22. And contrast this with the recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that said 97% of young adults overall have worked within this period. And also 32% of people with autism had a job within 2 years after transition. So they have even more trouble after they transition out of high school. So even though most young adults with autism indicate that employment is their goal after high school, they're still struggling. So studies have shown that providing support for people with autism to find and maintain employment through supported employment have been beneficial, but less is known about the role that self-determination plays in these employment outcomes. And we don't really know a lot about self-determination in the autism population. We know that problem solving, especially in social situations, can be difficult. And we know that people with autism may have a different process in setting goals and working towards multiple goals at one time. So we see the transition to early adulthood as really a critical time for thinking about employment and self-determination. So when we look at the predictors of successful competitive employment, so we're talking about employment in the community, working alongside people without disabilities for the same pay. So when we look at the predictors of competitive employment, one of the primary predictors is a history of work. So going in, almost half of the young adults with autism are starting behind. Another key predictor of employment is self-determination. And research has shown that students with disabilities who are more self-determined have better employment outcomes after high school. And the same research also shows that intervention to promote self-determination leads to better adult outcomes, including employment after high school. So a lot of people talk about self-determination in different ways. So I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about self-determination. So we're talking about a personal characteristic that all people possess to varying degrees. And that characteristic is manifested when a person mobilizes their actions and behaviors and their supports to make things happen in their lives. So they're causal agents in their life. So self-determined action is defined through causal agency theory, which describes how a person responds to opportunities and threats from their environment. So self-determined action is defined as initiated by the person in service of freely chosen goals. And the actions are enacted with a sense of belief that change will occur as a result of the actions taken. So for us, this model describes actions that we take every day. Most of us have been using and refining our skills related to self-determination in our everyday life. But there are times when we are all in environments that do not support our self-determination. Think about a time when you sought to make a change or contribute to a cause, but were ignored or told you weren't qualified, or you didn't have a mentor or someone to help make sense of the experiences you were having. So all of these are environmental threats to self-determination. So I also think these ideas of self-determination can really be better understood in the context of our own lives. So most of you have a goal of becoming an occupational therapist, which I think is a great goal. So every day you're presented with opportunities to advance toward this goal. Hopefully this event is one of the opportunities that you've chosen to participate in that's helping you lead towards your goals or forming your ideas around being an occupational therapist. So you've mobilized yourself to be here, and you've probably also mobilized supports that are maybe watching children, or someone's helping you cook dinner or walk the dog or something while you participate in this webinar. So you've probably also responded to threats to your self-determination. There's possibly a TV show that's on right now that you really want to be watching, or that you want to watch when you should be studying, or maybe a train is running late and you're already late for a meeting. So we all respond to these threats by weighing the consequences of our actions. And sometimes the TV show wins, but we can make that determination based on our previous life experiences to know when that's a risk to take. So self-determination develops through three mechanisms. Supportive environments provide all of us with the opportunity to be autonomous, set goals, make decisions, problem solve, and see the outcomes of our actions, all of which are important skills related to self-determination. And people with disabilities do not always live in environments that support these skills in a meaningful way. For example, we'll hear a lot of the people that I work with, the caregivers, I'll hear a lot of times, we don't want them to fail, it might hurt their feelings. Or I really don't think they can do it, so I'm just going to do it for them. And these mindsets and actions from caregivers or people with disabilities environments are limiting a person to try something, maybe fail, but learn from that, which further develops their sense of themselves. So many times, for us, these opportunities are enough to develop self-determination. However, some people may benefit from a structured process where these skills are specifically taught, which is the focus of the intervention that I use in my practice and that I'm focusing on for this research. And then we recognize that no one is truly independent. All of us need modifications and accommodations along the way. Many times we can recruit those supports as needed, but for people who need more assistance with developing supports, OTs and other professionals are well trained to help with this process. So the picture you see now is the overall model of the self-determined career development model, which is the intervention that, that I'm using as part of this grant. So I've told you a little bit about what self-determination means, and now I'll talk a little bit about this model. So this model facilitates a person through 3 phases. Each phase uses a problem-solving sequence that addresses the aim of the phase. So the first step is to set a goal, and not just set a goal, but really think through the barriers that may be encountered when working towards the goal. So implicit in this step is understanding what job or career a person wants, and it may take weeks or months for a person to determine that. So there are steps we can take within this phase to maybe do some job shadowing, or have an internship, or watch examples of a job that a person might be interested in on the internet or something like that. So all that's kind of built into setting a goal, getting the person the experience that they need to make an informed decision. In the next phase, the person implements a plan that addresses a barrier that was identified in the goal setting phase. So the plan could consist of learning communication strategies for a specific industry, or getting job experience from an internship, or learning to ride the bus. Whatever the barrier is to their goal defines what the plan is. So it's a very individualized process. And the last step is to reflect on the goal that was set and their progress towards the goal. So in that reflection phase, a person may set a new goal or create a new plan to move closer to their existing goal. So it's a very individualized process that could take anywhere from 2 to 3 months to work through. So central to this model is self-directed learning. And what I mean by that is that it's the person that's initiating the action, setting the goal, enacting the plan, and reflecting. And the facilitator, which could be an OT, it could be a caregiver, is there to provide support and act as an advocate. So I'll give you an example of how this has played out in my practice. This woman, Isla, wanted to work as a nail technician because she painted people's nails as part of her day program, and it was something that she really enjoyed doing. So there was a beauty school close by where she could train, where people train to become nail technicians. So during phase 1, we visited the nail salon. They have a free clinic where you can have your nails done so the students can practice, and we also talked to a recruiter about what's involved with getting into the school, which turns out it's kind of involved. There's a lot of anatomy and physiology and chemistry involved with the process, and there's an entrance exam, and then you have to take tests along the way in the program. So this represented barriers for Isla to attend school. So she wanted to put an action plan in place to determine what kind of support she was going to need to pass this test. So we got a practice exam that we could work through. So phase 2 was working through that practice exam and figuring out what supports needed to be in place. As we were working through that, we kind of went into phase 3 as Isla kind of determined on her own that the entrance exam posed a significantly large barrier to getting into beauty school. So we guided her through some reflection, and through that we determined that she may still want to work in the beauty industry, but possibly as a nail technician might not be the route to get there. So, but the great thing I think about this is that she worked through the process and came to that determination on her own. She had heard a lot of times that it wasn't going to happen for her and that she should think about something else. But she was able to come to peace with that through this process and really make an informed decision about the next phase in her career. So that's just one example of how this model has worked in practice. So we've used this, the SDCDM and the team that I work with, we've used it in several studies with adults with intellectual disability. And so the outcomes that you're seeing on the screen right now are from a program evaluation of the work that I'm doing with the community agency that I'm working with now. We wanted to know if the SDCDM, along with providing support for locating and applying for jobs, resulted in employment. So in our first year, 9 out of 12 of the job seekers that we were working with obtained competitive employment, working an average of almost 4 hours a day, 2 days a week. So 2 of the job seekers actually obtained 2 jobs, which brought the number of jobs up to 11. Another study implemented the SDCDM as part of a customized employment process. And this initiative was funded through United Healthcare and was part of a larger capacity building intervention related to employment. So most of the year was dedicated to recruiting partners and business leaders and training stakeholders. But through this, 8 out of 25 participants also found jobs. And one of the big takeaways from anybody who's done this kind of capacity building work is that a year is not enough time to implement everything, that from the training to also finding people jobs. There just wasn't enough time within that year to get a whole lot done. So another multi-site trial trained direct support staff at community agencies across another state. This project specifically focused on self-determination outcomes and found that autonomy in particular increased throughout the year of this project. One of the drawbacks to that study is that self-determination is a construct that can take a long time to develop, more than a year. So one of the things that we wanted to do is begin to understand how self-determination develops through this smaller study that you're seeing right now. So a critical component of self-determination is understanding yourself. And this study used a single subject design to determine if a person understands their strengths and interests better after participating in the SDCDM. And as you can see, participants 1 and 3 voiced more strengths and interests as a result of the intervention. But participant 2 did not voice more, but qualitatively, one of the things that we noticed was that her answers became more focused. So that gets me to the grant that we're talking about today. So all these background studies have informed the proposal that I submitted. The SDCDM has not been used explicitly with young adults with autism. And knowing how this model can be implemented within a community context can help us understand how to modify the model and the training procedures to bring the intervention to scale through a larger randomized controlled trial. So our aims were to determine if the SDCDM was feasible to implement with young adults with autism with a certain degree of fidelity. And we also wanted to investigate the impact on self-determination, goal attainment, and employment outcomes. So we're partnering with a community autism organization that serves over 1,000 families in the Kansas City area, and we're planning on recruiting 34. So it's a small study. We're not randomizing or controlling anything, but we're just trying to figure out if it works and if there are any adjustments that need to be made to the process specifically for people with autism. So this is a diagram that kind of outlines the process that we're going to be using. So we use a repeated measures design to determine the impact of the SDCDM on our outcomes. So we'll use the COPM, which has become a great tool to use as part of the goal setting process, and then the goal attainment scale and the ARC self-determination measure. So we'll also conduct qualitative interviews with participants to assess the feasibility. So that's really where we want to look at what worked for the participants and what didn't. What can we change for our next study? So we hope that this study will further the research, transition research, showing that addressing self-determination as part of a community intervention leads to positive adult outcomes, in this case, employment. So I also want to acknowledge a lot of the funders that we've used to help lay the groundwork for this proposal. But I really want to thank you guys for coming together and for putting together this event. I've enjoyed talking to you, so I'm happy to answer any questions now, too.
Thank you, Evan. That was a great presentation. and actually very interesting because I personally just, my last fieldwork was very related to teens with autism, and we had a whole class discussion the other day about learned helplessness and how it's a very fine line between learned helplessness and then actually sharing, providing the opportunity to fail so that then they build their self-esteem. So it's just kind of an interesting topic that I personally interested in. We do have a question here from Scott. He is asking that we heard about caregivers in Kathy's presentation, and you mentioned that caregivers may be inhibitory to some extent to the development of self-determination in disabled individuals. Any plans to study interventions in caregivers that might bolster development of self-determination in the disabled individual they care for? Did you catch all that?
yeah, and that's a great question, and that really kind of leads me into like the next steps that we want to do. So there's a companion model to this called the self-determined learning. We like to use long words, and I'm trying self-determined learning model of instruction. So it's a similar process, but it's been used in schools. And the team that I work with has used that to train teachers to be the facilitators of the model. In the community, I really want to focus on, so right now we're just kind of seeing if it would work and how people with autism respond to the intervention. But the next step for me is to involve more caregivers in the process, both caregivers in the kind of adult support world, which we've done a little bit of that, but also caregivers at home to be involved in implementing the process. And I think I think that'll be a really interesting thing to look at. So from the results of this study, we'll develop some training materials that'll help with that to get them involved. I think that's a great direction to go.
And then we have the same question. What's your next step if there was unlimited funding, if it was not an issue?
So that's one thing. We really want to involve the caregivers, and in any efforts that we take to really scale up this intervention, caregivers need to be involved, and because they are so integral to people with autism's life. But so the other thing that I want to do is really explore the relationship between employment and health. So if we can use this intervention to give people jobs, does even exploring jobs and then attaining jobs, does that lead to better quality of life outcomes in particular? And I want to also look at the mediating role that self-determination plays in that.
Wow, interesting.
So that's kind of the other longer term study that we're looking at right now.
Very nice. I guess last question here. Do you have any thoughts on peer-to-peer mentoring for this population?
Yes. I'm trying to formalize them right now. So I work with some self-advocates here. Actually, some of them are involved in supporting people with employment. So I'm trying to also figure out in the funding mechanisms how I can pay them to maybe be facilitators through this process, because I think they will. I think they add a level of understanding that that it's hard for someone who doesn't experience autism to have. And I think I've just seen from the people that I've worked with that they have really creative ideas for supports for other people that that the job seekers really respond to. So I definitely think that I haven't thought through it all the way, but there's actually one person that I'm thinking may help be a facilitator for this project also, to kind of see. I'm just curious to see how that's going to go. So yeah, I think that's great.
That's great. So we don't have any other questions, but once again, thank you so much for presenting with us today and being part of our first webinar series. We would love to encourage everyone to sign back on Thursday, April 20th at 5:30. We have Elizabeth Larson talking about motivational occupational coaching and mindfulness for caregivers. And then Erin Foster at 6, speaking about feasibility and optimization of cognitive intervention for Parkinson's disease. So once again, thank you, Evan, and thank you everyone who logged in today.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.